Pia, welcome. And I'm so happy to have you here. And to let listeners know that we mean business, I want to hit you with a question right off the bat.
Woohoo!
um,
Baptismal by fire.
I'm gonna dive right in. And don't worry, we'll circle back to a little more like soft intro, all that stuff. But I want to ask you right away, so we can just jump into it. What has been the biggest challenge that you have faced and conquered in getting other people or an individual to make a positive change?
Okay, this is interesting because I don't believe in getting people to make a positive change. That's not just what resonates with me in the term in sense of people have to want to make a change.
Ooh,
That's the first thing.
so
I don't
is
need
that
to
a
get.
prerequisite, or is that something you work on with someone?
Oh, I think that's a prerequisite because if someone isn't willing or wanting to make big change or a change happen, then I can't get that for them. And at the end of the day, people have agency and they're naturally creative, resourceful, and whole and totally responsible for whatever change they want to create in their own lives. So I don't put myself in the position to get change for someone and help them overcome it. That said, when someone is open and willing and curious and hungry for something different, whether it's a pivot point expansion, could come from both pain or pleasure, right? Partnering with them to really shine a light of awareness on where they are, what they really want, what might be blocking them, and getting wildly curious together and creating a really safe space for courageous exploration. To me, that's where change happens. And it's more like subtle inner shifts that eventually over time create change, and it feels like change just creeps up on you like shit. All of a sudden one day, oh god, everything feels like it's just changed, but actually the change has been subtly occurring every session, or even more than the session. What people do in between session is where real coaching happens. It's what they do with it, and then eventually change feels like it surfaces or arises, but it's really a subtle transformative process. You can't necessarily touch it, which is why there's a theme I've been thinking a lot about lately. It's belief, and belief comes from trusting, whether it's your work, in yourself, in your business, whatever it might be, believing in it when you don't have external evidence that validates the belief, because that is the nature of what belief is, right? And I think it's so important to our growth generally. And I'm bringing that in now because you talked about change. And sometimes we might be changing, but we might not see that evidence yet. And I think it's really important to trust yourself and trust the process. And of course, trust the partnership that you're in, first and foremost yourself, to understand that it's a process and it's not this like immediate one day that could happen. You might have obviously positive effects from the work that you're doing immediately, but real change, I think, is a slow burn. It's not a happy meal.
the the image that comes to mind for me is I have a huge sweet tooth. I don't know if you like sweets, or I'm a Ben and Jerry's fiend.
Cherry
Um,
Garcia
and
kind of guy.
no, I'm a
Chunky monkey.
whore all the way. I cannot get enough of it. Yeah, give me a box of chocolates on Valentine's Day. You can wine and dine me for sure. But um,
Good to know.
for me, I'm thinking of like when whatever the thing is for you. But so for me, it'd be like a pint of ice cream. And if you're like you're mindlessly, you get to the bottom, all of a sudden it's, oh, I didn't even realize it's gone. And we think of that with pleasure a lot of times, but or eating ice cream or whatever. But I think the same analogy kind of and visual holds true for what you're talking about in terms of tackling a challenge or making a difficult transition or change. And it might not be so mindless, but I think you can have the same experience, at least from what I've observed in my work, that you guide someone through that process. All of a sudden, you pick up your head and you're like, it's hiking a mountain. You focus on not tripping up on the roots or the rocks. All of a sudden, you pick your head up and you're like, holy shit, look at that view. I didn't even realize.
Mm.
And that's the image that's coming to mind for me as you describe that. I think you also just framed up the whole rest of our conversations. So I would love to circle back to a bunch of the points you made. But before we do you want to just actually give a little introduction of like people who may not have known or heard of you before? Who is Pia? What do you do? Who are you?
I am a New Yorker, Quebecoise, I'm a recovering nomad first and foremost. But I grew up in New York City and I settled roots in Copenhagen. So it's just a fun fact that's unbeknownst to me, it turned into home, another home, though I've come to firmly believe home is wherever we are. Our home is in our body, especially when we feel at home, as someone who cycled through many different countries and schools in my life. So I'm in the land of pastries and bicycles, and it's a nice place to be. Otherwise, I work as a creative partner. So I creatively partner with whom I like to call visionary rebels, unconventional dreamers, and inspired misfits to help bring their visions and ventures into the world to create impact. That's the most succinct sentence I got from what I do. And there are different ways that people can partner with me in different creative journeys that we can go on depending where you are in your business or your own creativity and what you're looking to bring into the world and what's really calling you. So I've worked as an award-winning creative director and copywriter in creative industries and in the creative industry and agencies for well over a decade, and then launched Collective Studio. So I combine creativity and coaching, creative coaching, to partner with people and help bring their dreams, their brands, their businesses, their art to life. Kind of like a creative doula or midwife. Just breathe, we're getting there. So, yeah, that's the most succinct way that I could describe what I love to do. And what's become really present for me is I believe a lot in being in integrity and congruent. So it's okay, how am I doing that for myself? Because that's so important that I can be my own creative partner, helping to bring my own visions and my own ventures to life, because that's what sort of creates, I don't know, integrity and wholeness and modeling. And so I'm really excited that I gave myself the space and invested in my own creativity through birthing a book. It's not even writing a book, creating a book. And that really feels like a birthing process, which I started almost a year. It will be a year in November. Last November, I started the book writing process. And it's a book called Welcome to the Creative Club. Make life your biggest art project yet. And it debunks the myth that creativity is reserved for the chosen few and invites everyone to access and apply their creativity to the design of their lives. And I share stories, personal stories, of how I lost and found my creative power to invite people back into their own innate creativity. So it's more like an invitation. It's an anti how to. I don't know about you, but I've had enough with the how to's telling me I don't know if it's X, I don't know what it is, but I feel sometimes there's a lot of advice about how one should be, how one should live, how one should do, how one should think faster, work harder, be better. And there's a place for all of that. I'm not downing it, but I felt, for me, what felt important was to create more like an invitation. Like, hey, this is my sort of rough and tumble and beautiful and terrifying life. And here are some things I've discovered along the way. And I'm at eye level. I'm not an expert trying to tell you how to do anything. I'm right walking with you side by side. We're sharing water, we're climbing, and we're experiencing. And yeah, and maybe there's some insights that I might share that touch you or motivate you in some way. And that's really my hope with the book, that I can just impact one person.
Clearly creativity is a big part of who you are and your life, but in terms of the book, and I'd love to spend more time on that in a minute as well. It sounds like, is it fair to say what you're describing is the difference between using the word should versus could?
Mm.
And so, I see you nodding, and just to unpack, actually, before I even say that, what does that mean to you when I say that phrase?
It's an invitation is imagine what might be possible if. And then the person fills in the blank. And I love the what if. What might happen if? What if this? What if? And just like expanding our aperture to be able to see different horizons. And I think If we're humans and social and creative beings, it's often together in partnership that we're able to shine a light on blind spots, invite people into different perspectives, and just share vulnerable stories that really connect us. And I feel like that creates enhanced sight, if you will. So that could reminds me of imagine what if.
Yeah.
And you can also go through hard shit and still come out, use that pain as it transmute it as a means in which to grow. It's possible. It happens. Use that friction as momentum, as possibility, as my friend Paul would say. I love this expression so much. I mention this often. He calls them like fucking growth opportunities, FGOs. And you know when you have an FGO feels gnarly, like it can be really hard situations you find yourself in. They're like challenging, and you're like, damn. And they're different perspectives you could hold. And when I think of my friend Paul, and then I'm like, yeah, it's just an FGO. And that just dilutes it and gives me a different perspective over whatever challenge I'm facing. Because it's true, often the friction or the rub can be a gift. It doesn't mean it's easy, but it can be.
I think I want to unpack this a bit more because I think this circles back to what you were saying before about like belief and like courageous exploration. I'd like to unpack that too, but just this should versus could, imagine if, like that word if, I think, and especially when you bring up integrity. So I'm gonna try to tie all these things all these things together here. One of the best definitions that I've ever heard of integrity is closing the gap between what you say you're going to do and what you actually do. And so I
Yes.
think from a professional perspective, it's also, is it that Churchill quote, I think, about being in the arena?
Yes, that's Roosevelt.
Whatever. One of those old white guys. That's who I'm thinking of. But yeah, it's the idea, for those who don't know the quote, because I would butcher it. But basically, it's being in the stands. It's easy to point and criticize and whatever. For those of us actually in the arena, if you're actually playing the game, if you're actually doing the work, that's when your perspective starts to change. And I think that's what you were alluding to in the fact that if you're going to guide people through a process, you want to be in the trenches too and actually doing the work. And in my experience, oftentimes we think about coaches or consultants as these sage, wise, old, whatever experience. Like they have so much knowledge or expertise, and that's what they're tapping into. And of course, you have to have some level of competency and skills, expertise, etc. But I think that saying it that way does not honor the fact that we are all on a journey and we are all always learning and growing, or at least that's the hope. We all have room to grow. That is, I think, a fact.
100%.
And so when it comes to this integrity piece, there's that, to me, that's almost an external way of looking at it. It's like my relationship from me to you. For me to be able to give you advice, do I have integrity in what I'm saying, what I'm practicing, what I believe? Am I just feeding someone bullshit, or do I actually believe in what I'm saying and doing, etc.? But I also think what you brought up with your book as well, this invitation, explores in my mind more of the internal component. And I think I'm wondering if this makes sense to you, because I think to connect the dots, what you talked about with the very first question is of a prerequisite to even make a positive change is they have to want it. They have to be ready for it. And I think a lot of times when we use the word should, there's this almost negative connotation at times, but I don't know if it has to be negative. I think it's more so just there's this pressure. There's this like unspoken push, right? And I think that we perceive that as a negative thing oftentimes, but if you own it and you're responsible for it, I don't necessarily think it has to be a bad thing. I think it starts with could. And to me, the word if is really interesting because if you want to do X, then I think it, in my experience, is fair to say that in order to achieve X, then you should do Y. And of course, there are many different avenues, but I think that's part of what the whole experience and exploration and having coach and guidance is for, is to help navigate that and figure out what is going to best work for you. Not necessarily like, because there's different strokes for different folks, but I'm wondering what comes up for you as I paint that picture and pull these different thoughts together and experiences together.
Yeah, I think should is a judgment. It's a duty. It feels like this is something that like oftentimes it could be something that someone else thinks I should do, or the judgmental part of me that thinks, oh, you really should do this. For me, it's often a tell. So when a client uses the word should, I just go, interesting.
Mhm.
What is that? Where does that come from? Just getting curious. What is that? And most oftentimes it points to some kind of feeling of duty or judgment, and it's heavy, and there is a negative connotation. Now, of course, this doesn't apply blanket to everyone, but also with myself, when I hear my own internal should, it's like we should ourselves to death. We should do this. We should do that. We should. It's a sign that there's something that I feel I dutifully should do, and for me language matters a lot as a writer. It's important, as a human communicator. So you could say I will, I want to, I get to. Those kind of change in my perspective of the game. I don't know, I think should is an interesting tell, and then when it comes up you could just explore it and get curious without activating the judge. Oh, why am I shitting myself? What is this? What does that mean for you? I don't. That's my take on the should. I really appreciated what you said about the integrity piece, which is like closing the gap, which to me is modeling. So oftentimes in a coaching relationship, you will model what is it like to have transparent communication that doesn't have judgment. So let's say someone doesn't show up for a session multiple times, something's going on. And like the next time, instead of getting judgmental, it's just say, hey, what's happening? You haven't shown up for a few times for yourself, not for me, for yourself. Are you committed to yourself? Are you committed to your relationship? Or a really good question, our relationship, where is this happening in other places in your life? Because what you do in one area usually applies to multiple areas, which is both positive depending on what it is and can also have a negative effect depending on what it is. But it's really interesting to look at one area of your life and how you are in that one area usually bleeds into other areas because it's you. And then it's just getting curious about it. And that to me is like a modeling of this is what it is to just have an open, transparent, honest conversation without judgment or critique or any of it, but just really getting curious. And so I think that integrity comes like we model for each other. You ever have someone who models boundary setting? Like I've had a couple of people model really beautifully, and that kind of teaches me, like, oh, it kind of gives us permission if we need it. Sometimes we do. This is what it's like, or this is how it can be. And I think that's beautiful. So modeling and showing up in the world in a way that, yeah, you got skin in the game. You're practicing what you're preaching. You're walking your walk as you fall and stumble because no one's perfect. And that's what I also write in the book. Some days I'm doing this really well, other days not so much. That's just how it is, but it's more like the intention and the desire and a commitment to doing whatever it is that you're looking to do.
It sounds like what you're describing is the exploration piece as well of being curious and open, like the without judgment piece. It's like, all right, you use this word or whatever the thing is. But to get a little bit more specific, just to paint a picture for people listening so they can I like, to me, exercise is always the go-to easiest example. And we could pull up a more personal example as well. But thinking about, I want to lose weight, and specifically I want to cut fat, and so I might tell myself I should not eat my Ben and Jerry's that I love so, so much. And so I think that's where this is relevant, in that, yeah, you're exploring. That's interesting. Why it's
But
unpacking the why behind it. And go ahead.
exactly that. I was just going to interject and say, but then I would ask, what's important about losing weight?
Exactly. And
And then you would say whatever you would say, and then what? And they have like the 7 whys. I think there's an exercise that you can do to keep asking. Actually, but in coaching, like why is that? Why do you want to do that? Why you want to do that? Yeah, you ask enough time to get to the core. But it's interesting in coaching certification. One thing that we're taught is a lot of people, for starting a question with why is usually a no go. Not because it's look, there are cases you can ask,
It
but
can be
generally
abrasive.
it can
Yeah,
be feel pokey, defense, make people defensive. So usually that's why and if you noted, I said, what's important about that to you? Not like, why do you have to,
right.
why do you have to you lose weight? There's a different tone, so that's why words matter.
Yeah, I mean, almost it's almost like another version of a should in a way because it has that
Yeah,
connotation with it. But the seven whys. I think I've heard it called the so what game. You just keep saying so what and
I like that one too. It's an Andy Warhol quote. He said he was really liberated in life when he realized even the trauma he had with his parents, or this happened or that happened, that he could say two words, so what?
yeah, that's
That happened, so what? Okay, as that was something that worked
yeah.
for
You
me
can spin that a lot
beautifully.
of different
Right? I know you.
directions. But I guess I think we're very much on the same page here, even though I get the sense that we also might have different styles and we can come at things from different angles, which I think is part of the beauty of
Thank goodness.
coaching. Yeah, exactly. And then also I think it's part of being able to adapt and part of the one of the goals of this podcast and the show is to be able to share these ideas and these different approaches. I am really curious though for the people listening who might be going through a change, and then maybe we can start to give some stories and examples as well. Um, you called it courageous exploration, and I think we've been talking a lot about the exploration part and the like the so what or the why behind, and there's alignment and integrity and values, and that's really the end goal that we're getting to. And hopefully if you're listening and you already have some expertise, this is just a reminder. And if you're new to the arena, then this is maybe that's what's at the end of the tunnel. That's the point, the purpose, the direction. But the experience of it, to me, is reflected in the courageous part of that
Mm,
phrase that you used. So I'm wondering, from your experience and perspective, what makes the exploration courageous?
sometimes we have to go places and look at things that can feel challenging. So you have to like, I'm like, it's like a layer cake. You got to get to the different layers or whatever metaphor you want to use. There's like things that are stacked. There's usually a want or a need on the surface, but often there's something else that's you really want behind that. That might be an expression of. So it's like getting courageous to go to those places, to look at those things and be like, what's that about? What's here? And to co-create a courageous environment is to also feel, first of all, making it's 100% confidential. What goes in the vault stays in a vault, in the vault. That's so important,
Mm-hmm.
I think, to create courage, like a
Safety,
courageous
yeah, yeah.
exploration. Safety sounds maybe obvious, but it's just to create that kind of very confidential, this is us. And there's no taboos. Anything can be said as long as there's no one getting hurt. There are some, but mostly anything can be said and explored together. And that there's a space that's going to be co created by both parties that enables that kind of, as you said, like deeper exploration that requires bravery. We put on our backpacks and we're like, all right, let's go. Um, and I think that's really beautiful because it's the art of transformation, and it's both people that co-create that space, which is why I think having that full body yes fit for the if for anyone listening, like when you meet someone who's going to be your partner in whatever it is that you're looking to create in the world, to really feel on some level energetically, yes, I don't know where we're going to go or exactly what this might be, but there's something in my spidey sense that says this could be a good place, even if you might not feel ready, because most of us don't feel ready, like ready not ready, if you know
Can
what I
I
mean.
to just to clarify that point because I think there's a distinction to be made. There's the discomfort that you feel in exploring your own shit and unpacking the layers and really just any change, period, good or bad, it doesn't matter, is going to be uncomfortable. Putting that aside, from the coach's perspective, for people listening that want to be a better coach or get into coaching or grow their coaching practice, this comfort level, this the spidey sense, the fit, the vibe, whatever you want to call it, it's been my experience that is something that you can create. That is not, of course, there are always outliers, and there's some people that just you are just not your people. You can't speak the same language, sometimes literally, if you're global, and there's language barriers, but the sort of personality mesh has to be there. But part of my uh, training in my master's program, which was based and rooted in counseling, psychology was to, and we were talking about this right before we got on here, was to mirror body language and was to match the tone. And you can kind of pace. And that was actually a technique that we were taught called, it was basically pace before you lead. So I'm curious, do you have any takes or input on that in terms of the creating not just the space, because that I think has a lot to do with just integrity and just following like ethical guidelines and values, but specifically in creating that connection with someone so that they feel that fit, that vibe. Is that, yeah, do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, I have a multitude, so I'm gonna just try to take the different sides of it. Like one thought around that is the closer you get to your own clarity about who you serve best, where your real zone of genius is, and what you do, and that takes time from a business perspective. You're going to have different clients. I mean, I'll speak for myself. I've grown a lot in clarity. It's been 3 years, and now things feel like the dots are starting to connect and it's a lot clearer. But it took me experimenting, exploring, trying, and being okay with being somewhat unclear to get here. So I think the clearer you are, how you express yourself and what you invite your people into, the more you're going to attract the right people for you. That just is something that came up as I was listening to you. The second thing, sorry, what else did you say? So that was one angle. Now I lost my train of thought. That's how it goes.
Yeah, just creating that fit or the connection with what's.
Ah, the fit. The reason I like to say the fit is also for people to feel comfortable. They're always their own, they have agency and they're always people. We're all always at choice. But also to feel like, yes, you need, as a client, you need to feel like this is a good fit for me. Because yeah, anyone can mirror body language and make you knows what to do to make you feel like you're in a quote unquote safe place, right? But at the same time, you can tap into yourself to feel into, does this feel like the right fit for me? And it's for me, I always want to have that open conversation to say, how does this feel? How does this feel for you? Sleep on it, feel it in your gut, because that's part of it. It's part of also agency and reminding someone like you're always free to choose, even though we know that. And so I don't know. I just like a reminder that it's important for me too. If I don't feel aligned, I'm going to use the word energetically aligned in some way, then I, with integrity, won't explore the full like a long partnership with them, and I think with a person, and I think that's fair. That hasn't really happened to me, to be honest. But if it did, I would, hey, I don't think we're an energetic match at this point in time, and that's okay. So I don't know, there's just something about permission and reflection and an invitation to tap into your felt sense, into your gut, like how does it feel, and that to create space for that inquiry to happen is important, I feel, rather than the rush of, okay, I'll give you like a little ethics, right? Like you have, if you assign right now, then you get this, or no, you need to tell me within, right now within the hour, or like all of those tactics don't speak to me. So that's also where I come in from, like the fit. That's part of it. Like that's a side angle of that. And then you had a third one around techniques. You were talking about mirroring, and so your question was, how do I co-create that through my own techniques, or
Yeah, for again, just to, if the focus is on creating that connection, that sense, that's more just the sense of fit
I
with someone.
I feel it comes naturally. Of course, as you get to know someone and work with someone over time. I don't know if it's because I've moved so much in my life that I feel that one of my gifts is being able to very quickly connect with other humans. And I think that's why it's so interesting to sit down and really map out, whether it's a lifeline or different exercises you can use, what are the main events that happened in your life, high and low, that led you to do the work you're doing today, because there's gold in there, in both the peaks and the valleys, of what led you to be uniquely placed to do this work that you're doing. And it's for yourself to confirm, oh yeah, and also to articulate that with for other people. And so one of my golden nuggets is, hey, I've turned quasi pained, like moving, being a nomad, moving, having to move into different cultures, different schools, different environments, and quickly adapt. And also growing up in New York City, where I don't know, I've had meaningful conversations with strangers quite frequently that I'm really grateful for. So many. I love that. May never see them again. And there's a lot of honesty in it because that person has nothing to gain. We don't know each other. So it's really just a human, we're just going to connect and talk, and I've had so many of these beautiful moments that punctuate every day when I was in New York. I really miss that. That's like the biggest thing I miss about New York City. So I think that is one of the things that I am able to bring to the table. And I don't know, I've been through a lot of shit in my life. So I'd love to believe, I'm sure everyone has a little judgment. So I'm not going to pretend I'm on a pedestal, but I'd love to believe that I have a very low judgment. I don't judge. I don't judge people because, man, I've been there. I've been in the highs and I've been in the lows. And I hope that there's some of this stuff that's communicated. That's why you say energetically, because you really feel energy, you feel people. That is just part of what creates it. And I don't have a technique to put down, like to check. It's something that's organic and fluid and happens in the space.
Yeah, it's something I've been reflecting on a lot more in the last probably even year or two because I didn't move to nearly as many countries. I've always lived in the US, but I think there was a span of my life where I lived in different homes. I think every year, I think it was like 8 years in a row. So that like moving
It's a lot.
around and like meeting new people, kind of
Yeah.
thing, and then also just like upbringing it. So I that resonates with me. I can relate to like the word that comes to mind is the chameleon. You can
Shapeshifter
fit
is the one I
into,
use.
yeah, you
Yeah.
can talk to anyone kind of a thing. And I spent a lot of time breaking that down to try to help teach some of those things to others. Not maybe on an energy level. I don't know if I could break it down that far, but I'm curious in terms of all that moving, and I'm not sure the exact timeline here. So perhaps maybe the easiest way to condense this into one question would just be to ask, what is the whistle stop tour of your moves in your career? So both physically or geographically, and then also like career moves, time, yeah, transitions to date.
Before I answer that, I'm going to just want to say something else that you just triggered in me as I was thinking, but I'll come to your question.
Yeah.
The other thing, the more you trust yourself as a partner, as a coach, the more techniques are helpful. They're really good. But the more I feel that you can let go of some of the scaffolding that makes you feel safe in a space with another human and dance in the moment and follow your intuition and see what happens when you let go. That doesn't mean don't have. There's always, for me, there's always like a dance floor, if you will. There's always, we're creating a container. There's what you're bringing into it, how you want to be transformed or what you want to have after. But that space in between, real magic happens when you trust yourself, trust the person, trust the container, and let go, and see what emerges in that conversation, in that space, in that exploration. And I've noticed that I've been drawn towards following a more emergent strategy, the sort of more, the older I get or the more experience that I have, because I feel that's where a lot of magic happens. And it does take courage. It takes courage to be in that space, to just show up without, for example, without a PowerPoint and say, okay, you have an intention and you share that intention with, of course, whoever, if it's a group or another person. But what happens when you let go of the structure a bit? Because who is that structure serving? It's just maybe it's serving everyone. I don't know. But maybe it's also serving you because it does feel safe. It definitely does. So, anyway, I just wanted to share that because as I also use, especially when I first started, oh man, the scaffolding was so helpful. And it was like when you learn how to do anything, you lean on theories and practices that really support you because you're learning. And it's such an important part of your own growth. But at some point, it's interesting to start experimenting with what happens if I let go a little.
Do you think you can get that magic without having had the structure?
I don't know, probably not to a certain extent, because I feel like it's how you learn. It's like part of the learning process is, I don't know, it's for example, we learn grammar rules, like how to write in English. There's so many rules actually as native speakers. I don't even remember most of the rules that I'm and those rules are there for a reason. They help us become adept speakers and writers with the English language. And then at some point they become so ingrained we forget, most of us forget, oh, what is, why am I don't, I'm doing the right thing but I don't remember why I'm doing it because it's so long ago. And so it's like you have the rules and then you're able to break them, but I think you need to learn them first before you can break them.
Yeah,
And so it's more, no matter where you might be as a coach, if this is relevant for people listening, it's not saying you don't have to throw it all up in the air, but just to experiment with letting go a little bit and trusting yourself and your
yeah.
client and the space just to see what emerges. And it could just be in these little pockets or these moments. And then I don't know, it just popped up as we were
I
talking about techniques and tools. And again, they're really important and I needed them, but I think it's really interesting when we can also let go of some of them and step into a different space.
I think that in itself is an approach and a damn good one as well. It makes me think of I took music theory in high school and it was very, I don't know if you can see it on the screen here. I have
Is
a
it
guitar
guitar?
behind me.
Yeah.
I used to, I was in jazz band. I used to play and
Cool.
sing and write a lot more. And I remember the teacher specifically saying there are rules to music. And he's saying you're going to learn all of them and in order and the time periods in which they were created or took place. And he said, and you will, and this is what other people from hundreds of years have done as well. And we were on the same path is to learn the rules so that you can break them.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
I actually think this is a really interesting dichotomy of the. I like how Jocko Willink puts it with discipline equals freedom. I think that's the name of like his book. And for those who don't know him, he looks like a meathead Marine, former Navy SEAL is actually a guy, but he's actually like a really terrific leader, deep thinker, and just speaks very plainly. And this idea, I think, is what you're alluding to as well, is that actually having the structure and those scaffolding pieces, I actually think when you get past that, you've had some maybe not mastery, but you have some proficiency in using or understanding those tools. It actually just becomes more like colors on your color palette or whatever that what is that called that an artist holds that has all the globs of paint on it that they dip their brush in, or just having more paint brushes or more tools in the toolbox really. And I think the experimentation, it just gives you more fuel, more ammo to be able to do that. So I think both,
Definitely.
yeah, like a lot of things in life, it's a both answer.
Definitely.
With
I'm just finding at this point and where I'm at, I find it fascinating just to have to lean into trust and
yeah,
emergence, like what's emerging here. And I find that most challenging. Like it's not because it's easy, it's a practice, but it's because I can see what comes from that space
mm,
or the impact that can have. And it feels powerful. And it's also maybe because it is uncomfortable, it can be uncomfortable. Anything you're learning that is new is often uncomfortable, and then you learn it and it feels, or maybe the more that one keeps expanding, there's always going to be a little friction because there should be a new space that you're entering into it. And that, see, I used the word should. Ha! Caught myself. See, should.
well,
No, there is a new space that we can enter, right? And I think that's where the growth lives, and that those semi friction points might not always feel like friction.
let me stay there for a second. Again, because the should popped up. Do you think it's possible to have growth without any sort of pain, discomfort, friction?
Oh man, there's a spirit. I can't remember. It's not Eckhart Tolle, but someone else who said, for the most people, pain, discomfort, friction, challenge is a prerequisite for growth. But it doesn't have to be. Gary Zukov, he's like old school Oprah guy, it doesn't matter. But I remember something he said stayed with me is it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. So you have to be careful that we don't just say that it has to come from pain. No, because then you're programming yourself to think unless I quote unquote suffer a bit, I cannot grow. And then you might continue to seek out those things. So just being conscious and aware. And so it's yes, Often that is seems to be the case also in my life, but doesn't have to be. I do believe that we can also grow through somewhat pleasure. Like, why not? Why can't we grow from pleasurable situations? It surely, as humans, it must be possible. We've just seen more examples of the latter.
Yeah, then you start to get into like even pain and pleasure is subjective. Like what one person finds pleasurable, someone else might find
That's
painful.
true.
And so I think it's you start, but there has to be some sort of stimulus. Is probably the whether it's a constraint or a
There's usually
treat,
friction of some sort.
something. Yeah,
Yeah, it's the eustress. It's like that curve,
Mhm.
right? Is that curve for the amount of stress that's required,
The peak amount of stress.
the peak amount of
Yeah,
stress for performance.
yeah.
And I think that's really interesting to think about. So it's really finding that what is that amount for you, which will change as you change in this world. Because if there's not enough, then there's no action, there's no motivation. You just get lethargic. And if there's too much, you can get overwhelmed and stressed and suffer from PTSD and lots of other things. So it's how do you find that sweet spot? And I think creativity ultimately is about solving problems in novel, original, and exciting and useful ways. So there's a little friction in that. It's, oh, something's not quite working. What can I do? How can I solve that? To me, that's creativity, right? It's not just paintbrushes and palettes and colors. It's also how you creatively respond to life's challenges, to me, is creativity. And I did use the word challenge because oftentimes it's that friction, it's that top of the curve. And that's why I like the FGO, going back to the FGO, because then we can take a step back, not take ourselves too seriously, or the thing go, okay, it's just another FGO. Like, it's just another FGO. And maybe laugh at it a little bit, celebrate. Doesn't mean it's not hard. I'm not saying bypass that it's hard, but just acknowledge that shit, universe is having me step up. And for me, that creates levity. I like playfulness is important to me. Life is too beautiful to take too seriously that or myself too seriously all the time, or hopefully none of the time.
What,
So I don't know. That's yeah.
speaking of frameworks, what comes to mind? I have to mention. Are you familiar with Flow from Mihai Csikszentmihalyi? I will never be able to spell his name. Does that ring?
No, I think I might. It's a book, right? Or am I?
He has a book. He it comes from originally like sport psychology, and this is my
Okay,
original background.
interesting.
But the
Tell me.
easiest framework to think, it's not exactly the same, but I think it's a good basis for what you're describing as creativity and the stress curve and keeping that in mind.
Eustress. Thank you.
Yeah,
There we
yeah,
go.
yeah. Is you think of a graph and you have two axes, and on one you have skill. So the further down you go, the more skilled you are. On the other, maybe on the y-axis, you have challenge. And so the more
Yeah.
challenging a situation, the higher up on that axis you go. And so there you can then draw a line diagonally that just splits down the middle of that graph. And all along that line, you would be in a state of flow because what happens is if the challenge matches your level of skill, you are engaged
Mm,
and you are a state of flow is it sounds like what you're describing of creativity and energy. It's a sense of timelessness. It's that moment when you're if you're an athlete, you're like you're hitting the game-winning shot, and a split second feels like eternity. There's no time cap on it. Or when you're painting, it's you just lose track of time. It's been 8 hours. You forgot to eat. You're just in a zen state almost. So that is really what flow is. And that's also when peak performance happens because I think what you described earlier is the art of taking the scaffolding, letting go, throwing it away. That's where the magic happens. I would say flow is where the magic happens. And the dangers then are if the challenge, or you think of the stress curve, it's not labeling it good or bad. It's really just how much or how little stress is helpful. If the challenge is too great, you feel overwhelmed, you get pushed
yeah.
out of flow. And if the challenge is too little, or your skill is too great for that amount of challenge, then you are bored and you're disengaged and you're out of flow. Does that fit what you're
Yeah. And what's interesting about what you just said is scaffolding before you enter the flow. So people think like flow is not just a state you sit down and
putting on?
because it can sound like that when you're in the graph and stuff. It is actually the discipline to sit down when you're uninspired, unmotivated, and just what helps me is just to say, this could be shit. Full permission that whatever I'm going to write can be absolutely shit. It doesn't matter. That's not the point. The point is that you sit down and start writing. And after an hour, like with that, I deactivate a lot of the judge and the critic and all. I just go away because I'm like, listen, go. There's no space for you here. This could be whatever it needs to be. I'm just going to sit down and write. And usually flow kind of kicks in while I'm writing. But it takes, I don't know if the word is scaffolding or discipline, but it takes something to actually sit down and start doing the thing that then leads into that flow state.
Structure, accountability.
Structure, yeah, all of those things. Because it's funny because our conversation is very much going from structure to framework to and discipline to this loose, emergent, open, creative. Let's see what happens. And I
It's a
think
beautiful
both are
marriage.
required.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Both
Yeah.
are required. And it's interesting if you look at the brain, the default mode network, which is when your date was what your brain is doing thinking of when you're not thinking. So it's basically when you're daydreaming, when you're at rest, when you have the intention to do nothing, like literally not Netflix, not like just nothing, like just wander.
Mhm.
Like that is correlated with creativity, like
Mhm.
neuroscientists. But yet, it's not just the default mode network that is required for creative thinking and problem solving. You also are going to need the control mode to step in when you have to analyze those ideas at
Mhm.
some point, like for eureka moments. So I think it's really fascinating to look at how the mind works through the lens of neuroscience to see, which it mirrors what we're saying basically. But the challenge is that most people give priority to more control network functioning. So it's research and analysis and evaluation, which is needed, but without the default mode network, without the daydreaming, the wandering, the not unplanned, the sleep and taking a nap, staring at clouds, doing the thing, then we're actually not activating our full creative capacity. And so what I posit in the book is that we need to honor what if rest is on the other is our creative genius is on the other side of rest, because we're so programmed to prioritize. I mean, you don't set calendar invites to daydream. Like we're so programmed to think that these other functions these other functions are more important when actually rest and daydreaming and wandering are just as important.
It's fascinating. I giggled for a moment when you said we don't set calendar invite because I've literally I have actually done that. I'm not the best at keeping it, but I have blocked off time from this
Nice.
is my yeah because I
Taking nothing
understand this
away.
is the importance. But and what's also interesting to me is how I think this varies depending because what's so fascinating is it sounds like the your target audience, the people that you typically work with, require more or are maybe more structure based and require more of that. Hey, let's let go a bit. Let's rest.
I think most Americans, sorry to interrupt you. I think a lot of us are hardwired to work. It's in my DNA. Like I feel it. Like I
Yeah,
know
New
Denmark is
New
not.
York.
Yeah, Denmark is not a. Like you work to live, you don't live to work.
Yeah,
People get off
yeah,
of work at
France.
4. They go to their pick up their kids, and they have a different way of living. They might come back online for a little bit afterwards, but it's a whole different thing. And I could see how I was just programmed to like, what? Why is everyone leaving at 5? This is really weird. When I worked at an agency, and it took so it's even with my own business, it's rewiring how I want to work and live, because doing, we're not born to do, we're born to be, we're born to experience all of what this amazing world has on offer. And if I get stuck in blinders prioritizing only work, which can happen, then I am not eating from the full buffet of life. Like I am just having the one meal, and that is not how I want to experience life for this moment
Yeah,
forward. I love what I do. I really do. I wouldn't do it. That's the beauty of being an entrepreneur. Hopefully, you choose what you really love. But there are other things that I love too, whether it's my own art, whether it's friends, whether it's just travel, that or the other. And it's making room for those things. But for me, it's been a rewiring. So a lot of people I work with are from the States, different places. So I just think it's we fall into that other category. It's just in how we grow up.
for sure. Yeah, I think a lot of it is cultural. And again, just from our experience, we work with a lot of coaches and we provide a lot of that structure. And so I think a lot of times we find the opposite to be true. And again, not even, I don't even like using the word opposite, but it's this spectrum really of which way do you need to lean to be in better alignment. And again, even eustress is based on performance, which you could almost say synonymous with productivity, which I think that even is a default perspective of that's, we label that as good, but to
Yeah,
your point, it's no, it's not really good, or it's just where do you want to go, and it's playing
absolutely.
the seven whys, the so what game.
Which is a great coaching question. So, what's important to you? Like, the only thing I can answer is what's important for me. You answer what's important for you, but getting curious about if you could design a day in your life in the future and make it any way you want, from the moment you wake up to the moment your head hits the pillow at night. Take me through it. What are you doing? And I'm talking what you're eating, like down to the detail. What kind of day would you design for yourself? It's a fascinating exercise. It's really cool because what's included in that day and what's not included is very telling. I know it's just one day, but one day makes it much more concrete rather than, oh, in a year from now, where are you? Which is fine too. But there's something about the detail and really sitting with it and asking, not what you think you should. There's where the should comes in. Not what you think you should be doing in your ideal design day, but what you really want. What you really want.
Speaking of, let me throw some questions at you since we're getting close on time here, and I'll start with that one. And let me combine them to maybe make it a little easier, just at least for me to ask. So if we said you woke up on, I don't know, a Tuesday, but a year from now, because you said change takes time. So let me just give you some time. If there was one thing that you would want to be different about that day compared to your day yesterday, what would be different that you imagine in that day?
The way I see it is more I would turn up the volume on what's already happening in my life. I would just turn up the volume.
Like what? On what?
The components are here. I get to creatively partner with phenomenal humans to bring amazing work, businesses, brands, art, whatever into the world. That is really rewarding. Maybe the types of partnerships might expand or might grow or might change. I'm still doing it today, but in the future, the shape might look a little different or the people might look a little different. Who knows? Just turning up the volume a little bit,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah.
making it a little louder, a bit more expansive. Working on my own creative projects, on my own art, doing it 100%. I would keep doing that. And I would love to have more collaborations. I would love, it's what I'm doing. So being able to have my thriving, beautiful business where I creatively partner with others, and then also just being able to create my own ventures without necessarily needing to have an immediate ROI and doing it for the love of doing it. And then being able to do both, and then also being able to contribute, give back in some way, whatever way that might look like. I would definitely turn up the volume on that. On what does it look like to contribute more and turn up the volume on spending more time with friends. I've been in a book cave for a long time. So spending, I would definitely put some more travel and leisure in the mix. I'd love to have a house, a summer house in northern Italy. Like that would be phenomenal. We all have like different dreams because I want to be closer to nature, because I like the idea of having access to different like environment, food, different things, different, yeah, walking with my dog through a field. I don't have a dog right now. Maybe I have a dog. Who knows? But I think what's really fun is when you feel like you're in alignment. It's, yeah, it doesn't look dramatically different, but I've balanced things out a bit more. I've spread the buffet a bit wider. I've learned how to manage different passions and different aspects of life to make it feel really full. I've up leveled in a way.
Mm,
Like the way I see growth is like one of those
mhm.
spirals that just, so that's how I see it, right?
A
If you're on the
staircase
right,
up the tower.
it's spiral, yeah, exact spiral staircase. So it's, I'm just on another rung.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because there's always going to be a bend on every rung. And that bend is usually where discomfort or challenge lives. Like whenever you're turning a bend into a more expansive rung, you're going to feel it. And again, being aware that shit, I have the bends because I'm in the bend and I'm expanding. And this is wildly fucking uncomfortable. But it's because I'm growing. For me, that opens me up in a different way to whatever I'm experiencing. And that's really helpful. So I'll be past the bend on a different rung, doing a lot of what I'm doing, but in a more expansive way, is my long winded answer to your
More it sounds like continued exploration, turning up the volume on certain things. And to be fair, a year from now, it might be a different thing that you'd want to be turning up the volume on. But I sense
Who
a
knows?
practical moment in here because I'd like to spend a few more minutes on the book. But just before we step into that, there's one thing you mentioned, and I can't help but bring some of these things into practical, like down to earth, like where people can like touch and feel them. And I think a lot of times from a sensibility, yeah, that practical perspective, people who maybe are listening that are thinking about any change, and specifically though, it sounded like I'm going to frame this one up in the business context, but any change they think, how do I get past this hurdle? And so in business, a lot like we think about money and revenue and buying the house in northern Italy or whatever your thing is, your bills to pay, supporting a spouse, who knows. But when you talk about the intersection between what I just described of people have bills to pay, and then also the courageous exploration and letting go a bit and having I'll call it patience to not see an immediate ROI. I'm curious, do you have a personal story that you're willing to share in making that transition? And have you also, and it doesn't have to be a story, I just think that helps to ground it. And how did you deal, if you experienced that, how did you deal with that transition of the practical piece of letting go, but also I've got to get shit done and I'm a New Yorker at heart and I'm in Copenhagen. How do you make those things work for someone listening who's, yeah, sounds nice, but I don't even know how to get started.
One thing that came up before I answer is you said, like, how can I get over this quickly or something along those lines, the hurdle that you're presented with. And sometimes this might sound annoying and not concrete, but I'm going to say it anyway. What you really need to do is to stay in it instead of trying to get out of it quickly because it's uncomfortable. So you want it just to go away. And so you just try to do everything in your power to just move beyond it. That could be financial. Fuck, I just now need to make more money, so I'm just going to throw all my energy at it right away because that's just what I need to do because I feel really unsafe right now because I don't know where it's coming from, and I'm just going to throw all my energy at it. That's one way. And another way is just going, okay, what do I need to feel safe in not knowing? What do I need to feel safe in uncertainty? It could be small things. What do I need? Sometimes, okay, this word is I don't know, it's overused, but gratitude in a way of what grounds me is just like, what do I already have? When I start getting into this reaching, I got to go a little further. I need more. It's like, wait a minute. What do you already have that you're so happy for, that you feel so grateful for? It doesn't mean, and this is what it comes down to for me, it's being able to be grateful for all that you have and for all that's on its way. For all that who you are right now in this moment without having to be your best self, your better self, another version of yourself. I could just grow if I could just do this. Hey, I'm fucking awesome just the way I am. And I'm so excited to see that next version of myself that I'm becoming. Like, how can you hold both? So anyway, that just came up for me when you said needing to get over the hurdle quickly. Sometimes
Step
the
one,
hurdle
stay
is
in.
yeah, the hurdle is the FGO.
Mm,
What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do with it?
yeah. Well,
Right?
yeah. If you, I don't know, again, exercise. Want to build muscle, got to lift the heavy weight, but
Yeah.
don't put it down. That's your growth opportunity.
Exactly, exactly. And you got to start with
Yeah.
whatever weight you have. And that's how so you ask for a personal story. Listen, entrepreneurship is, for me, it's the meta lesson for learning how to move with trust with life. Sounds abstract, but what I mean by that is I don't know about other entrepreneurs, but I am often in uncertainty. Here's the raw truth. Life is uncertain. When you have a steady paycheck, it definitely feels more certain, but you could get fired at any time. Like it just feels more like there's an illusion of safety and routine, and there's place for that. I'm not poo-pooing on it. I'm just stating that when I was in a salary job, I felt much more secure and safe. And when I don't know sometimes where my next client or paycheck is coming from, it can feel really uncomfortable and scary and shit. And I remember when I first launched, I was really like, I had a cushion. So that's one thing. If you're going to launch and start your business,
Yeah.
it's good to think about
Think about it.
that. Yeah, there's a lot of talk about, right out the gate, 10K months and all this stuff. And that might be true for some people, most people around me. That hasn't been my experience. Building. My good friend who's a successful CEO said to me when I first launched, building a business takes time. I said, yeah, sure, you're right. In 1 year, I'll be like, to use the cliche, it's the marathon. It's not a sprint.
Yeah.
It's an
Yeah.
investment. It takes time. There's going to be highs. There's going to be months where money flows and months where it's like crickets. And it's like, as a human, how are we going to be with uncertainty? Like literally anything can happen in the next moment. We never know, but our brain doesn't like that. So we create this illusion of certainty. And for me, entrepreneurship is about coming face to face with how do I want to be in relationship with life? Do I want to be driven by fear, or do I want to start to move with trust? And I know what it's like to move with fear. I've done it subconsciously, consciously for many years. I don't want to do that anymore.
Mm.
Really curious as my own experiment. What happens when I start to move with trust? Okay, so for example, I don't know exactly where the next paycheck or what's going to happen or who knows. Well, I'm going to put my best foot forward and I'm going to trust that it's going to come. Doesn't mean sit on my couch, eat Cheetos, and not do anything, but it means that I'm going to show up fully, not go crazy and throw everything and not stop, and see what happens and give it, like, stay in the discomfort of
Mm.
not knowing. And that has been a muscle, a weight I've been lifting
Yeah.
since I launched.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, it was like maybe I was at 2 pounds and it was like, oh, ow. Like that. And then something good, like something comes in and then, and then something, then goes. And it's just like learning how do you want to be with it. And now I feel like the weight is much better because my mental load is lighter.
Mhm.
I'm like, I don't know. But so far, it's pretty good. I still don't know what it's going to be, what it's going to look like. But hey, let's see. Let's keep showing up and let's see without trying to grab onto the certainty of I'm going to book. Like, it, to me, and that's why I personally think that I don't have external, like huge external validation, because that's how I build trust. If I got everything I needed from the get, then I wouldn't use that muscle. I wouldn't need to because I got it all. So for me, it's for what I'm actually trying to do because it gives me a sense of freedom and connection.
Mhm.
Like there are deeper reasons why I want to do this. It feels like I'm in flow with life. I'm in sync. I'm like, it's what real freedom feels like to me. And freedom is one of my highest values. It's real freedom, learning how to be in that space.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that answers your question, but I live it day to day. There's some days I have more anxiety than others. I'm like, damn it, what's happening? What's going to happen? And then I just say, hey, where are you at? I'm right here. How's here? Pretty fucking good. Stay here. It's just future casting, and that's the what if game. If you can play the what if I fail, what if I don't survive, what if it doesn't succeed, what if I lose my money, what if, you can also play the positive what if game. What if I'm wildly successful beyond my imagination, deepest imagination? What if not only I survive but I thrive? What if I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be? What if it's all here and it's all on its way? You get to play the what if game, so you might as well
Turn it the other way.
play, yeah, turn it the other way.
Yeah, a lot of what you're saying resonates with me. Also makes me think of some of the sport and performance psychology learnings that I had, and also just my own experience as well. Like being in business, I think this is year 8 or 9 of entrepreneurship for me. And when I first started, talk about the uncertainty, I remember thinking at one point I made more money. I think I made $7,000 in my first year of
Yeah,
business, and I was like, "Fuck! I made more money working at a restaurant." I was like, "What?"
yeah,
I was just committed to it, so I stuck with it. And the next year I made more, and the next year I made more. And talk about the it takes time thing. But I was starting from scratch. I didn't know anything. I didn't even know what an invoice was when I first started. So it tells you, hopefully, if you're listening to this and you're thinking about starting, you're a little further ahead than I was. But so much of the irony is that I think what you're talking about, the takeaways that I get is step one is don't hide or run away from the discomfort, like embrace it. And it makes me think, I don't know if you've heard of the military phrase, like embrace the suck. I had a friend in the Marines and that was a real thing. So you'll probably hear it now that, on social media and whatnot, but stay in the discomfort because that is your fucking growth opportunity.
Exactly.
And what I'm hearing from you is that those two things, like that's the reason, it's like those two things go together, and that's also what allows you to then reframe, is what I'm like, whether it's the what if game or that whatever you need to think about, or gratitude to think about your situation differently to allow you to come at it from a different angle. And this is where the ironic part is, by not going guns blazing all out, this stressed out
Yeah.
from a place from uncertainty, what I've experienced and what we teach our clients in this space as well is the weird thing is it's actually typically the fastest way forward anyway.
Yeah.
It's so bizarre, but
Absolutely.
I remember my dad passed away when I was had just started my second business,
I'm sorry.
and I just threw 5 years ago now, and I basically just threw everything away. I had two different sports psychology workshops that I canceled. I had other clients for consulting work, and I said, "Hey, listen, operations consulting." I was like, I am not available for at least the next 2 weeks." He was still in the hospital, and the weird thing is, I just let go of a bunch of stuff, and then my business just took off. I was just so
Mm.
fucking busy after that. It took up all my time. And again, starting this business I'm in now, I left a full time position as a COO. And when I took a step back to reinvest and take my time, I launched a new program at 5 figure month. And that, I think that only it's this weird paradoxical kind of place to be. But again, I think we keep circling back to this beautiful marriage between structure and the art or magic side of, like, the art and science, or the
And
certainty and
logic or
uncertainty. Yeah.
yeah.
So, with that said, I want to finish by talking about your book. First time writing one?
First time
First
writing
time
one.
writing one? What's that journey been like for you?
Oh my God.
Is that, yeah,
My
yeah,
my husband said to me, it's like you started going into the ocean and you just kept walking, sometimes when the water is low and you just kept walking and then you started swimming. And then by the time you realized how tired you were and how far out you were, it was too much energy to come back, which was good because then you were just in the deep and you had to stay there. So I actually like that because it's true. I don't think I knew what I was getting into when I started writing the book. It's been a challenging and also extremely rewarding and, without me knowing it, healing process. That wasn't my intention. Writing about difficult moments in my life and having to face it and process it in a different way in service of the reader and in service of the book ended up definitely leaving an impact. And it was hard. It was hard to write those. It was not easy and it felt really vulnerable. It still feels very vulnerable that it's going to go out there in the world. But again, it's in service of, there's an intention behind it, which gives me more courage. But it was, luckily I've had amazing editors and a wonderful, actually one specifically editor that has just been such a fantastic creative partner. And that's another, the book reminded me of something I've known throughout my whole career and life, actually, is that creativity is collaboration. That's just it. So I often thought that, oh, well, you have to write a book, you have this old trope about being in a cabin somewhere, it's a man puffing on his pipe and writing his big novel in the woods. And it's just,
that kind of.
I think it's the stories we tell are really powerful, and we have these cultural myths that get embedded in our system. I had this idea that I had to do it alone. And actually, I didn't. And it was really beautiful because it's a big process. It's huge. So yeah, it's rewarding and challenging all at once. It's an FGO and also pleasure. I think both can exist, right? Sometimes when we're in the middle of something that's really challenging, we feel our own growth, we feel the stretch, and that feels really good.
Yeah,
So
rewarding.
it's the ability to hold both, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's what the book is for me, holding both of those things.
The wading out into the ocean image and then swimming into the deep, it makes me think of, I've never heard this phrase before, so I'm giving her credit, but I don't want to name her out her or anything on the show. But we have a client in our accelerator program I had a coaching call with, and she dubbed this feeling of Everest syndrome, where she said she feels like she's at base camp and there's all this work to do. And I said, hey, you're looking at 6 months of work condensed down into a paragraph here. I was like, don't, take your time. But it's that feeling of if you see the whole thing from the start. I've just heard so many entrepreneurs or business titans say if they knew what it was going to take at the beginning, if they really fully grasped that amount of work, they might not have actually ever started. And good or bad, I think it's just part of the human experience. And it sounds like that sounds a lot like what you're describing. The I'm calling
Definitely.
Everest syndrome is that waiting out.
Definitely. And one strategy that has always helped me in different areas of my life is I just take it one step at a
Yeah.
time. Because if I start, they started talking about marketing and promotion when I was still in the editing phase, and I'm like, no,
Oh,
I'm gonna shut that out because it's just gonna create a lot of noise. And what's actually the most, I love this question. What is the biggest needle moving task that you could do that's like the most important? And to me, being able to have that focus. Okay, editing, making this book as good as it can fucking possibly be is the most important thing I can do. Because if I don't do that, then what's marketing? Do you know what I mean? What's the point of that? So I'm just going to shut that down. I put blinders for social media, and I also had fear stories around that. Oh, if I'm not active, if I'm not consistent, if I'm not present, my business is going to go to shit. Oh, what's going to happen? And it's like, I needed to make some hard choices in order just to stay focused. That's how I work. I need
yeah,
blinders.
yeah. Make
Otherwise,
the one thing the thing. Make the every
had to
the
happen.
folk I know
Had to happen.
joined our bridge game, and that's one thing that we talk about in there is one of the rules of leverage is
Yeah,
focus, right? Like what is
focus.
the how do you
Yeah,
identify the thing and how do you stay focused on the thing? So 100%, yeah, on the
absolutely.
same page there. If someone listening wanted to, or let's say they picked up your book, they pre-ordered a copy, what do you hope that they most get out of it?
Oh, that's a good question. The ebook will be launched first in November, so in around a month and a half ish, mid-November, so that people will have a chance if it sounds like something that resonates with them. What do I hope people get from that? Listen, my temptation is to answer that question in a roundabout way. It's I hope they get whatever they need.
Mm,
And I offer a lot of different doors. And you could go down every chapter is like a little portal into a different way of seeing, a different way of thinking about it, a different, some are personal stories, some's neuroscience research. There's a lot of different doors. I did that because I'm inviting a lot of different people in, and some people might really want to step through one door and not another, or who knows. So I just hope that people get what they really need. And like every chapter, maybe someone, like I hope that someone has the book and they can just take a walk and activate their DMN or something, their default mode network, and just daydream, and then maybe just open it up to a chapter, and that chapter gives them what they need in that moment, whatever it might be. So that's what I hope.
welcome to the Creative Club.
Welcome to the
Welcome
Creative
to the
Club.
Creative Club. And
You've always been a member.
where would people be able to pre-order it if they were listening?
Amazon.
Amazon. Awesome. So just type that
Amazon.
in.
We're going to start. Yeah, we're going to start in mid-November latest, even probably the first week. My book is still in layout, so we're just waiting to finalize dates, and then I'll do the paperback and hardback launch will be in mid to late Jan. So
Awesome.
ebook
2025.
focus.
Yep. Final question for you before we sign off here. If you would reflect back on our conversation today, do you think that there is anything that you might change yourself as a result of our chat today?
I might change about what?
Your life, fill in the blank.
I might
Has anything
change.
changed? Maybe is a better way to frame it. Have you perspective shift
Yeah.
is or a way of
I
thinking?
feel more connected to you, Riley, and I'm excited that we were able to get to know each other in different ways and travel to different roads and to hear your perspective. And I loved how you always introduced your perspective because we have a lot of similarities, but we come through different doors. And so I also appreciate how you would bring it to make it more concrete for people where possible, like specific takeaways, knowing your audience. So that was also nice to witness your eye on both our connection and conversation and kind of supplying, giving people something that they might be able to use. So that would be my question to you. what what is one of the biggest takeaways from our conversation that you could offer anyone who's listening that they can implement quickly or explore as a result of the places we've traveled today?
Immediately, the thing that stands out the most to me is I'll just use one word of labeling. And the story that brings this to life, I remember giving a part of my sports psychology degree. We worked with lots of different people, but I did parent workshops for the Olympic Development Program, which is like a youth soccer organization in Massachusetts. And I remember the very first one that we did for that season. There was like 112 parents in the room, and I was probably, I don't know, 23 or something, 24 or something like that. So I was a little nervous, and we were presenting a topic. We were presenting on emotional regulation,
Mm.
and we were talking about the different kind of roles that the child and the coach and the parent that they all have. And one of the examples we gave is, I said, listen, if you see that, you might normally think of anger as a bad thing, not a nice emotion to experience or to witness. But if you see anger in the context of an athletic field, on the pitch, whatever, that might be a really good thing. It might be really helpful. So I said, when it comes to that piece, especially from that perspective of like you're guiding someone through something as a parent, and obviously it's know your lane. That's a different can of worms. But I said it's not necessarily about whether or not, for any emotion, whether it's good or bad. It's really, does it help or does it hurt? And to
Mm.
know that, you have to be clear on all the things that we talked about, of like your values, your goals, integrity. What are the so what game, the seven whys, the what is actually important. Also understanding that can ebb and flow and change, and also understanding that it can take time, which is what you said at the very beginning,
Mm.
especially if it's business related. So if you have a goal and it's hard, stay in it, keep
Mm.
going, and then don't label it. I think that was my biggest takeaway, is don't label something as necessarily good or bad. It's, we can come at things from completely different angles, and we can still get to the desired end result.
True.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to share another
Yeah.
perspective. Or rewrite the script. Figure out what script is operating in the background. Oh, I don't know, whatever it might be. There's a story. There's a belief operating in the background when we're feeling anything intensely or going through something. So just get curious. It doesn't mean the story is wrong or good or none of it. It's just, oh, there's a belief operating in the background. The belief is, for example, I have to work really hard to get money is scarce, whatever. There might be a belief that's creating this, oh God, I got it. I'm not safe, whatever. And then just ask your question, is that belief hurting or serving or harming me, right? And then you get to choose, I'm going to write a new story about that. I'm going to write a new belief. Money is abundant. I am safe right where I am, and whatever, fill in the blanks. But the thing is, it's not enough just to write it. You have to then live it. So if money is abundant, if that's a belief, then do you give freely to, I don't know, charities? Do you like, how do you behave? Do you always buy the thing on sale when you're at the grocery store and not permit yourself to? What are those small little micro actions that you take that either support that belief or reinforce the other belief?
Mm.
Because we're smart, the mind is tricky. So if you want the body to believe, if you want to fully believe, you have to show, you have to create your own evidence that you actually believe it. And that's something that I work with a lot, because I do think we generally have beliefs, we generally have labels, we generally have stories. So you can try not to have one. That's one way. Or you can say, I'm actually going to write my own script. I'm naturally creative and this is going to be great. So then how do I create evidence for that? So that would be an invitation, if it's useful for anyone listening. If there's something that you're struggling with, like asking, is there a belief that's fueling my behavior? And is it helpful or is it harmful? And if it's helpful, great. And if it's harmful, cool, you can change it. And okay, once you do, what would you change it into? Usually it's the opposite, right? The opposite thing. And then how do you start to take small micro actions that show that you actually believe that you create evidence for your mind? And that's something that I find as a very practical technique, if you will. And you can use it in small things. You can even any behavior. You could eating your pint of Cherry Garcia or whatever, chunky. Well, you said chocolate, whatever, chocolate fudge sundae,
Vanilla
whatever
cake.
the. What's is there a belief this is behind it? Is there some kind of belief, fueling, and behavior? If you want to change, coming back to how we started, if there's a behavior you want to change, obviously there's a desired change. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here questioning the beliefs that are fueling a certain behavior that you're looking to change. So that might be one pathway to explore and just get curious about and experiment with and see what happens.
Pia, thanks so much.
Thank you, Riley. It's been an absolute pleasure.